We begin tonight with U.S. Defense Secretary Mark Esper calling the Philippines' decision to revoke the Visiting Forces Agreement, quote, a move in the wrong direction. Esper issued the statement after the United States received the Philippine government's notice of termination on the two-decade-old military pact. The Pentagon chief also described the abrogation as unfortunate, coming as it did amid rising tensions over China's extensive claims in the South China Sea, which the U.S. has always considered as international waters. U.S. State Assistant Secretary Clark Cooper said the cancellations put at risk more than 300 engagements and exercises annually, which the VFA had provided the legal framework for.
Joint training, having U.S. military personnel in port, on the ground, on the flight line, does require that we have a mechanism that allows that. And that's why the VFA is so important.
In a statement upon receipt of the notice of termination on Tuesday, the U.S. Embassy in Manila said the move was a critical step with substantial implications for the long-standing alliance. Presidential spokesperson Salvador Panelo says the reactions were to be expected, but he said he disagrees with the Defense Secretary Esper, saying dissolving the VFA is actually the move in the right direction for the Philippines and that it is about time for the country to stand on its own militarily.
The President is chartering foreign policy which is independent. And as he says it, we are friends all, enemies to none.
Now that the U.S. has been formally notified of the Duterte administration's intent to scrap the VFA, analysts are warning of risks and fallout that may or may not have already been considered by government. Greg Gregorio with the story.
In the past 2 decades, the country's visiting forces agreement with the U.S. had been put to the test twice. In 2005, when U.S. serviceman Lance Corporal Daniel Smith faced a rape case. And 10 years after, when U.S. Marine Joseph Scott Pemberton was found guilty of murdering Jennifer Laude. They were put to trial under the Philippine court in accordance to the VFA. Now that the pact is set to be scrapped, Gabriela is concerned with what would happen should another case occur.
May problem talaga tayo when it comes to airing U.S. soldiers accountable.
According to VFA consultant Clarita Carlos, this might mean subjecting American offenders to other existing laws.
Yung domestic laws natin, na kapag ang foreigner ay merong ganitong nangyari, then siyempre yung ating domestic laws will be followed.
Immigration might also be an issue once the VFA is terminated, says political scientist and security analyst Romel Banlawi.
We need to issue them visa to stay for a certain period in order to conduct military training or humanitarian mission.
Former Foreign Affairs Secretary Albert Del Rosario meanwhile fears that the country might also lose immediate humanitarian assistance from the U.S. and ultimately lead to Beijing's bigger influence on the country.
An abrogation of the VFA would lead to the termination of EDCA, the MDT, and other international agreements, which would further serve to bring the palace even closer to being dominated by Beijing.
Something that military historian and defense analyst Jose Antonio Custodio echoes.
Bang China lang makikinabang lang dyan. Kumbaga, no? So kasi nga wala nga yun nga isasabi ko nga ang dahilan ng pagdating ng VFA is precisely to counter China.
But the group Bayan takes a different stance, explaining that the VFA has fallen short of its objective.
Has the VFA deterred China and prevented it from taking over Scarborough and other parts of the West Philippine Sea? Apparently not.
The man behind the president's orders to scrap the VFA, Senator Bato de la Rosa, whose visa was cancelled by the U.S., admits that his conscience now bothers him.
Nire-regret talaga dahil ako ang naging rason eh. Ako ang last straw.
For News 5, Greg Gregorio, we are One News.
For their part, military leaders say they are braced for very real implications and potential disruption from the scrapping of the VFA. AFP Chief General Filemon Santos says Philippine military capability will inevitably be affected. General Santos said the AFP will do its best to anticipate and fill gaps once the agreement is terminated, but the military chief backed government's assertion that despite the change and challenge, the Philippines can do without the VFA. He says the country will strengthen defense cooperation with other countries.
not actually namang kawalan because as of now, you could see we have already some equipment, we have new planes, we have ships. We have lived before nung nawala yung basis agreement, 91 to 97, we have not received something. Wala naman nangyari sa atin.
In the meantime, Santos said more than 300 activities lined up with American troops will push through this year. The activities include the Balikatan, Sikap, Sama-Sama, and Kamandag exercises.